What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Bro History at Henry Zamoda and Danny Abdel-Jabbar. What's up, man? How are you?
Chilling, man. As per usual. How about yourself?
I'm doing pretty good. So the other day, someone tried to assassinate Trump again. And
Yeah.
let me ask you something.
hmm
Is this not really being covered too much by the media? Because I saw it on the news and I basically was just like, "Huh," and I turned it off. Really haven't heard too much about it since the
Really?
day of. Yeah,
Maybe
I
your
don't know.
feeds are different from me. Because all
Maybe,
I see is
maybe
this.
I'm just, maybe I'm just completely tuned out. I was watching the Knicks Hawks game. It pops up on the news, and I was like, huh, all right. And I just go back to the game because that was more of a priority. But it feels really strange as it feels like it's like this weird background noise. Like it's just kind of the nature of things right now that it doesn't cause any type of like distress. It's almost like something that is expected to happen. Like
Mm.
I almost would have the same reaction if you told me that there was an assassination in like the Cameroon or something, or like in Zimbabwe, there was like a political assassination there. I'd be like, oh, how about that? And my question is it just because of the nature, the regime, where it has this kind of like third world corrupt character where you almost expect these things to happen?
hmm
I'm trying to figure out why, at least for me, I'm looking at this story and I'm just like, huh. And I don't really have too much of an interest in it. Like I feel like
Okay.
it's very par for the course. It's just something that happens now.
Mm.
Or perhaps I'm just kind of immune to it, given that there's been an increase in political violence over the past few years,
Okay.
really starting or heightened by the assassination of Charlie Kirk, who by all
Okay.
means was a major political figure,
Right.
who could have been, and just Charlie Kirk was 35 when he was assassinated, 33, in his
Something like that. Yeah.
early mid,
Mid 30s.
he's around my age.
hmm
He likely, I don't want to say likely, but throw his name in a hat for future Republican presidents, he would definitely be there. He was an extremely powerful political figure. And maybe starting with that, just become to this, which is an awful thing to say because, I don't obviously condone any of this, but it feels weird. It just feels like
I mean, you brought up
normalcy.
Charlie Kirk. There's also the Luigi Mangione killing Brian Thompson thing, which, that's not politically motivated, right? There's
Yeah.
the Thomas Matthew Crooks, when he tried to kill Trump the first time around. Or I don't
Yes.
even remember the name of the guy who shot up Trump's golf course or whatever in Mar-a-Lago. Like, so you're kind of touching on something. I think that the question that you bring up, whether something's actually building in this country, you know, kind of turns out to have a really uncomfortable historical answer. you know, are you desensitized? Maybe,
That could be it. That could be it. When Charlie
maybe.
Kirk was assassinated, I was sick to my stomach and just completely horrified.
hmm
Obviously, the situation is much different.
Yeah.
Technically, Charlie Kirk was a civilian.
Yeah.
Also, he was a young man. And most importantly, you saw it on television. You
That's
saw
it.
it on the internet.
That's honestly really it for me, to be honest, because there's so many people there. Everyone's filming. You got multiple angles in 4K. It was gruesome. And it's like, like him or hate him, his family was there. Like they witnessed him getting shot. And that was not a
It was
pretty
it
death,
was one of the
like,
most horrifying things I've ever seen, and I was like deeply impacted by it. I think
hmm
primarily because he was around the same age as me. He has a young
hmm
family.
hmm
Like I could just relate to his life very easily and like
right.
kind of put myself. Obviously, he lives like different, or he lived a very
Very
different
different
life
life.
than I
Yeah.
did.
Yeah, for sure.
However, I could kind of see myself in him in many different ways. And, I obviously I was a big critic of Charlie Kirk for a lot of reasons. And,
hmm
by no
As
means
was
do
I.
I like completely lionize him or anything like that.
Right.
But there's something like very relatable to him where you're just like, whoa. And
It's
even
also like a,
that, you know,
yeah,
well,
it's just,
even that, it's not really talked about too much anymore, is it? Like, you don't, it was kind of brushed underneath the rug.
I mean, I wouldn't call it brush under the rug. Brush under the rug would to me, like gives the intention that someone or some people or some groups are intentionally trying to, subvert information or subvert the conversation around something. Like sweeping under the rug is like, trying to, say that there is no Epstein files. No, we don't have shit, right? Like that's sweeping it under the rug. That's like a systemic, like we're trying to not talk about this. This in particular, people not really thinking about Charlie Kirk as much as we did when it happened not so long ago, is just our media landscape and our collective, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Attention span. We're very TikTok-y right now, if that makes sense to you, to coin a phrase. We're just looking at what's happening in the immediate sphere, and so many things are happening at the same time that it's just like kind of impossible to dwell on anything, no matter how big it is. I mean, we can sit here for probably the entire episode and talk about major, ridiculous, groundbreaking things, that happened within the last 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, right? We'd have the entire show would be filled up with just the most crazy, ridiculous shit. But also, historically speaking, I've been doing a little bit of research on this. This isn't particularly crazy. Like there's even crazier epochs in our country's history that I'd like to talk about today eventually, but that kind of makes what we're experiencing today look like kind of chill.
Yeah. There's been I don't want to say it's like a relaxed part of it's definitely not a relaxing time in history, but
No,
I think people always forget how much worse things were at some points in terms of violence, in terms of like racial tension. People, if you go online if you look at X, formerly Twitter, known as Twitter, you would think that we're like on the verge of like a war.
Mm-hmm.
However, in my opinion,
there were actual race wars.
Probably, yeah. In my opinion, like race relations are probably the best they've been in ever. In the 90s, it was much worse. In the 90s, it was much worse. If you went into the wrong hood, you would get your ass kicked. Now it's like you feel comfortable walking, like you feel fine pretty much everywhere. Maybe the hood's
minding their own goddamn business.
Yeah,
no, it's because everyone's just minding their own damn business nowadays.
Yeah,
because we're all dealing collectively with the same bullshit, and we don't have time for that anymore. And we also have very short attention span. So unless you're going out looking for trouble, it's like you're not gonna really find it.
Yeah, I mean, for me lately, the NBA playoffs started, and I'm a big Knicks fan, and this is like a year where the Knicks could potentially win a championship. So it's like that's like kind of where my mental energy has been going on,
right?
Recreational
not on the
type things,
not on the attempted
things
assassination of the president of the United States, right?
Well, in my mind, basketball is good for the social order of New York.
Bread and circus.
It's a uniting factor. So it's a place where Jews and Arabs can get along. It's a place. It's just kind of like one of those uniting things where you can put all of your differences aside, and you can. It's nationalism, really. Like being a sports fan is it tickles the same instincts as
tribalistic, instinct.
Yeah, this tribalistic instinct that we all have, and I think we all yearn for. So I think it's good to get that out of your system. Like, what is a prep rally? Like a prep rally is like literally like
it's like a
fascist
propaganda
parade.
For real. Yeah.
A high school prep rally is akin to like a fascist parade in some ways.
Yeah, it really is. It really is.
And it's like they're useful and they're good, and for some things there needs to be this cohesiveness where you can bring people in together who are from different backgrounds. So in that respect, I think
really
those
puts
types,
things in perspective.
Emulating
for sure,
emulating fascism is good.
Oh God,
some level of emulation.
Do not emulate fascism.
All right, let me say emulating like extreme nationalism, but hyper focusing on something that is like more recreational and does not have major
So it's
stakes,
I
I think is a healthy release.
to paint it with a broader stroke, I think finding the things that we can all agree on and rallying behind that, regardless of, our differences, is really that's the essence of what you're trying to say. Because like sports teams, like you said, a bunch of different people from different walks of life can enjoy the same team and rally behind that team, and suddenly, it doesn't matter who you are. If you like the Knicks, I like the Knicks. We're both Knicks fans. Hooray! We're crossing our fingers for for a playoff. Like, I don't know. So, but it puts things in perspective, because if people can like kind of set aside their differences for a sports game, I wonder if we could set aside our differences for other things. Well,
you have to look at what sports are. Like it is an emulation of war, or
can
at
be,
the very least. You're
can be, yeah.
emulating like a competition, like a zero-sum game, like a fight to the death. But there's safeguards there where no one actually, well, in most cases, no one, well, what you hope for is nobody gets hurt. Of course,
Unless it's like combat sports or something like that.
but you're watching an emulation of a high stakes competition, but that doesn't happen to lead in death. And I don't know. I think there's good in it. Like there's good in having that release and appreciating the competition. But let's not digress too further. So let's talk about this guy. Kind of a strange guy. Looks like a guy who would work in the nerd squad at Best Buy, right?
Geek Squad. Geek Squad, yeah.
The Geek Squad at Best Buy. So he's a Caltech engineer. He went to Caltech. He had an engineering degree. I think he was a teacher, right? Was he a high school teacher?
He was teacher for part of it.
So he had a NASA fellowship. He takes a train to Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. That's a crazy commute.
Yeah.
A train from, I didn't know they made rail. Like, what is this, like 1850?
He took Amtrak, man.
I didn't even know Amtrak. There was an Amtrak line that went, I guess you connect to different cities, but God, how long does that take to take a train from
I think
DC
it took like
to
3 weeks.
Los Angeles?
From what I was reading, I think it took him like he didn't take a direct flight or a direct train track. I think he stopped over in different places, but nevertheless.
I don't think there is a direct
train
track to New York to Washington, D.C. There is?
There is not. From DC to Los
Angeles?
No. That'd be awesome, but no.
Like a bullet train to the West Coast? That would be pretty cool.
That'd be fantastic.
You can just sleep one night on it and then you wake up and on the West Coast. That would be pretty cool.
It'd be awesome.
But yeah, so he takes it. That's just wild. It reminds me of the lady who went to go kill her husband, and she drove from like Houston to Miami or like someplace in Texas to southern Florida. It was like a 24-hour drive. It must have been further than Houston because that's on the east, but somewhere in Texas. And she was so intent in getting there, she wore diapers, so she didn't have to make stops. So she could just make the drive straight. She really had to kill her husband. But
really cruising motive, right?
Yeah. So the guy was extremely motivated. He checked into the Washington Hilton as a registered guest. You would think that there'd be a more upscale place than the Washington Hilton. Is that a nice Hilton?
It is.
To have the White House correspondent dinner?
It's nice, yeah. They do a lot of like DC related shit there. It's a nice place, but maybe not the most secure place as we've come to find out, but it's nice.
Well, that's why we need the White House ballroom.
We'll talk about that later.
Did you see that? So there's these influencer, we're living in the world of influencers.
Yeah.
And it's why I resent politics and so much, is that we have like these kind of online whores that hijack conversations and are paid to say things.
Like us?
And it's very, very relevant because, well, it's different because these are very coordinated.
Yeah, you're right.
And
we're not at all coordinated.
since liberals have dominated the media landscape forever for like its existence, the niche that the right wing had tried to fill to compete with liberal media, and I'm not even saying that as a pejorative, I'm just saying the media is largely liberal. They had to like really do it online, like almost using guerrilla tactics. So what they did is that they like essentially sponsor like right-wing influencers. And that's why you have these like Jack Posobiec, Mike Cernovich,
Mm-hmm.
who are like these weirdos from out of
Mhm.
nowhere who contribute and try to kind of basically herd cats to the Republican Party. All
Yeah.
of these right-wing influencers, they launched in unison messaging. This is why we need the Trump ballroom. This is why we need, well, it's not even the Trump, the White House ballroom. Like if you looked at
Yeah.
the messaging of all the major accounts, it was like that exact same messaging. Really strange. And I'm like,
I mean,
it's such a weird thing to endorse.
it's just, it's kind of, it's honestly, logically speaking, it's not terrible. Like, and this is me coming from me, like, I'm on the left. I'm a bit liberal, right? So, like, I'm not going to hate on the logic here. Yeah, they probably should have a secure location where they do these things, right? Other than the Hilton. I agree with that. I don't think there's anything wrong with agreeing with that statement. However, a time and place thing, like somebody almost tried to assassinate the president. And the first thing you want to talk about is, oh, we should push for this extremely expensive, clusterfuck of a ballroom that Trump, effectively started illegally. And he tore down the East Wing without any approvals. And then the courts ended up having to stop it. Now there's just a giant hole in the White House, until they get the appropriate like permits and like approvals from the, various committees and all that shit. And I understand it. I get it. It probably takes a fucking long time to do anything in DC. I totally get it. Right. But like time and place, man. A little late for that. Like we should be talking about other shit,
I think we should be perfectly capable of securing a White House Hilton, honestly.
Yeah, we should be.
Yeah, I
agree.
I don't think that's beyond our ability.
Secret Service's capability, which is kind of where the other
extra security measures.
Yeah, I mean that's where the other conspiracies come from, right? That's you see on the left is like, oh, that was staged. You look at Blue Sky for any amount of time. Right after that shooting, there was like, oh, it was staged. Like Trump sent somebody to shoot up the place, and oh man, this is gonna be fun. I believe it was Caroline Leavitt, 2 hours before the White House Correspondents' Dinner was like, oh yeah, there's gonna be shots fired at the Correspondents' Dinner, and she was referring to like, shots fired as in like jokes, like Trump is not gonna pull any punches, he's gonna say some shit, shots are gonna be fired. And then shots were actually literally fired. And then that, the liberal side of things, they were like hanging on to that. It's like, oh, look, it's an admission of guilt. Like they knew it was going to happen. This is all staged. It's all to give Trump, some more credibility. Because as we know, when Trump, got shot in the ear in Butler, when was that? 24, I guess. It gave immense amount of support, right? Like he got a huge boost. That's probably the reason. Maybe not the only reason, but a contributing factor to why he won the presidency, right? So yeah, it's a plausible, plausible thought process, right? But like at the same time, kind of like, what are you doing, guys? Like we're thinking about this wrong. Like we're ignoring the conditions and the motives that would make people want to kill, political leaders, and we're just saying, we need a better ballroom, so let's spend shit ton of money so that we can like literally encase ourselves and insulate ourselves from the issues that are, plaguing our country that are causing people to want to kill the president. So that's the first side of it. And the second side of it is we're trying to like pretend like this didn't exist. This didn't happen. This isn't real. It's real. It happened. It's a real person, that literally tried to kill somebody, right? So it's like both sides are like expressing this level of delusion, and they're not thinking, in my opinion, about like what is the issue. Why are we here? Why are we at a juncture in the United States history where like we said at the top of the conversation, where you read this on your phone while you're watching the Knicks game and you're like, oh, well, isn't that interesting? Then you just check out. You know what I mean? Like this is a wider problem, I think, which is why I kind of went down on a rabbit hole for this particular episode.
I'm completely checking out. Like I'm checked out of politics at this point. Like I'm just like, screw it all. And I almost don't want to have any type of involvement on it. But at the same time, there's people that are so into politics.
Yeah.
That they're they're committing regicide or whatever, trying to commit, some sort of self-imposed regime change. But I mean,
Yeah.
I guess this guy was just like a crazy libtard. Is that the best way to describe him? Like an
I don't know
extremist
if I would
libtard,
use those
or
words.
or
I don't know.
I don't think he was like a communist. He was just like a liberal, right? Like a liberal who
Also,
maybe
just in case anyone is either living under a rock or they're like you and they saw the headline and then they just like filed that away with like, oh, that was interesting, and then never thought about it again. Let's first talk about what actually happened, like just set the stage a little bit. And then after that, I'll talk a little bit about like who that guy is and what his motivations were based on like the manifesto that he left behind. Because,
but
they all leave one behind.
my reaction would have been the same if I was like scrolling the internet and I saw like a fist fight in like the Thailand parliament. I would have been like, oh, and then that would have been the same level of reaction, and then move on to like of like an AI dog rescuing a baby,
Yeah, exactly. All right, so here's what happened. Obviously, the White House Correspondents' Dinner it's arguably the most press saturated event in the on the calendar, right? Every major outlet is going to be in that room. Some of the not so major ones as well, and there ought to be a full Secret Service deployment because oftentimes the president's there. This is the actual first Correspondents' Dinner, though, that Trump attended as a sitting president because he skipped every single one of them during his first term. I don't know. Maybe it's because he got embarrassed at that one with Obama where he totally roasted him. I don't know what the deal is there, but he never attended. This is the first one he actually goes to. So at 8:40 at night, this guy, he runs through the metal detectors on the terrace level, which is one floor above the ballroom, and he's holding this like shotgun. And the Secret Service officer, that was there to respond, he ends up getting shot in the chest, obviously wearing a bulletproof vest. That saves him. He fires back 5 times. The shooter goes down, and surprisingly, nobody died, right? He was arrested, and the weapons cache that he had a 12-gauge pump-action shotgun, 38 caliber handgun, a ton of knives, and they were all in like a black bag. And, he was, at the time, he was staying on the 10th floor, and he was like all dressed in black, and, he used some kind of interior stairwell to bypass the monitored areas, which is wild that literally all of the stairwells weren't being monitored. Like that's an egregious, I don't know, oversight by the Secret Service, Nobody in the ballroom was seriously injured, though. That's the main takeaway here, But I mean, like, you think about it. This guy's like staying in the hotel. He has a room key, He's obviously got the motivation. He took a train all the way from Los Angeles to this place, with all these guns and shit, This should be the most security heavy press event of the year. And this guy is just like a couple floors above it, right? Like, what does that say?
Hey, if you look at the first attempt on Trump's life, that was egregious.
Yeah.
The way that there was a guy who like people saw on the roof and like people didn't react. It's just a really weird story. And I almost don't blame people for jumping to conspiracies because, some of things are just like, it's like when you have to attribute things to like negligence, it's like you can't even help like saying maybe it wasn't because they were dumb. They were all in on it. But
it's so comically negligent that you're just like, how can you explain that except for a conspiracy theory, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Like, how do you justify it in your head? But I mean, people fuck up. That's kind of what happened. Like, just people
kind of a lot in this case, I guess.
You think about how much you fuck up, and then think about other people. It happens all the time. Just like how some people, fuck up your order at a restaurant. Some people don't forget to check the stairwells in a hotel. I guess it happens. But this guy gets stopped before he reaches the ballroom. Secret Service does their job, but
mostly
he had a room key, Danny, right? Like, so he's a registered guest at the venue. Who is this guy? He's like if you grabbed like a meme on the internet, you were like, give me like a Reddit liberal. Like, this guy kind of fits the description.
Well, like I said, he's 31 years old. He's from Torrance. Again, he went to Caltech, got an engineer got a degree in mechanical engineering in 2017. He was He got a NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory Research Fellowship in the summer of 2014. Then he got a master's in computer science at Cal State, and that was in 2025. Over the last 6 years, he was a part-time tutor at C2 Education. He was named Teacher of the Month in 2024. On his LinkedIn bio, it says, mechanical engineer and computer scientist by degree, independent game developer by experience, teacher by birth. So he built his own video game. He developed a wheelchair emergency brake prototype as an undergrad. He tutored a number of students. One of these kids named Jason, 17-year-old, told NPR that you wouldn't expect him to be plotting some crazy evil plan to kill the president. He was a smart guy. So like his character, references were really good. His professor of computer sciences at Cal State said of him that he was always sitting in the first row, soft-spoken, very polite, good fellow. He's super shocked. His father was one of the elders at the Grace United Reformed Church in Torrance, which was a Bible-believing, like very conservative congregation. Interestingly enough, his manifesto reportedly contained explicitly anti-Christian messaging. So, I don't really know what's going on there. He also self-describes in his manifesto as a half black, half white, for what it's worth. So, yeah, I mean, this is not the profile of like what you would expect, out of this. But it seems like increasingly the people that are going out to try and murder people are like the nerds, what was that guy's name again? Crooks, who went and shot Donald Trump. Like that dude was super nerdy. Guy who shot Charlie Kirk, kind of a nerd, So what's this? This is like we have like a new political assassin archetype, is just like some nerdy kid. That's what it is.
It's like a nerdy.
I mean, he's the teacher of the month, for
libtard.
God's sake. Like he's just like a nerdy guy,
Like a nerdy liberal guy is like the new archetype for a political assassin. Like even Luigi Mangione, he was handsome, so he got like this weird positive
pass.
press.
Yeah.
Which I found ridiculous because he was just a murderer like that. Like I couldn't stand it when people were like idolizing that guy. Like I just murdered somebody. But yeah,
allegedly.
he fits that description he fits that description as well. If you read his manifesto, you're like, is this like some like Reddit rage out?
Kind of is.
Which it's like, oh man, healthcare's too expensive, man. Healthcare's just too expensive, man. Like, oh God.
I mean, he ain't wrong. He ain't wrong, but it doesn't give him a reason. Doesn't give him a legit justified reason to kill somebody, though.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely not wrong. We have a messed up healthcare system, but just you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, dude. I think what's important is like how these people start to become radicalized, and I have some notes on like how this guy particularly became radicalized, because there's a lot of really good. Surprisingly, CNN did a really good timeline on this guy's radicalization. Like they dug pretty deep. They looked at 4,000 plus archive posts from his X account and like 700 or more from his Blue Sky. And they got a really clean timeline of like a guy going from normal to like not. So I'm going to read you some of the highlights from that. In 2022, his X account is almost entirely about Super Smash Brothers content and like YouTube gameplay clips. Normal nerd guy stuff. In 2024, he suddenly has a hard pivot to politics. I wonder why. He starts posting things, comparing Trump to Hitler. He makes calls to nullify the 2024 election. After Butler in July 2024, posts that he starts making posts that the shooting was staged. Kind of the same conspiracy reflex that you see around the attack that he did, right? That it was staged, which is interesting. February 2025, he ends up migrating off X into Blue Sky, which is obviously like the liberal X. And a few weeks into Trump's second term, this becomes his like main outlet for this shit. And, in April 2025, he wrote, everyone already knows Trump is a terrible person in multiple dimensions and no one has done anything. In August 2025, he legally purchased his 12 gauge shotgun. In December 2025, he wrote on Blue Sky, The best time to buy a gun was days ago. The second best time is today. In January 2026, so this year, Alex Preddy is shot by federal officers in Minneapolis, and he writes in response to that, nonviolence is going to have to show progress in the near future, which is kind of dark. He's like basically giving nonviolence an ultimatum. And then he wrote, if I am nonviolent, I die. And if I am violent, I die. That's a dilemma with a Nash equilibrium of violence. I don't really fully understand that, but I get the gist. This is a Caltech trained engineer who's like applying a game theory to justify political violence. That's not a throwaway post for him. That is like literally he's signaling like, I've done the math on this. I'm going to do something about it. And then March of this year, just not too long, a couple weeks ago, he calls Trump a traitor, and he wrote that having a traitor at the helm was the expected cause of America ripping itself apart. And then finally,
that's something that I would say. It's not like right there. Like I would say,
thank God you're not a nerd, Henry.
But that's like within the reasonable discourse of calling a president a traitor. Like honestly, it is. Everyone calls the other like political opposition traitors, and that it's nothing. I don't find that. What I find, like the alarming stuff, is obviously like working on a theory to justify political violence. That's the red flag right there.
Yeah. Now I want to pause there and just ask something, Henry, because you've watched both sides of this play out. When you see that arc, from this guy going from like a gamer in 2022, and then within a span of 4 years, he's a would-be assassin. Does that strike you as like a left-wing story to you, or is that like, does that code as something else? Like, how do you feel? How does that make you feel from that framing perspective?
Do you mean like when you describe his character and his background, like, do I feel like he's like left-coded or something like that, or is it
like,
a left-wing phenomenon?
Yeah, exactly. Is it like uniquely left-wing, this story arc, or is there something more to that, in your opinion?
I don't know. That's a good question. It's there seems to be this trend, right? Where there are these liberal types who are like taking up arms, where they're like, we need to ditch the peace stuff, the pussy peace stuff, and realize things have gone too far. They're not like commies, you know what I mean? They're not like these radical. At least they don't fit that description. Like, I don't think this guy was like a Marxist-Leninist to bring like trying to instigate the historical process and create the revolutionary conditions necessary to bring a dictatorship of the proletariat. Like, I don't think he was doing that. Like, seems to be radicalized by like political slogans if he's going
the internet
on,
Mm-hmm.
if he's going on Blue Sky. So that's a weird thing where there's like people are getting radicalized by literally like political slogans, and it happens on the left and the right. It could be because it could be more of a left-wing thing right now just because the right wing currently has power. But then again, the Trump administration, the Trump assassination, the first one attempt took place before the right had power. But, I really don't know. I think it's a good question.
I don't think I have an answer for that either. Yeah.
Like, are the left wingers more prone to violence? Because if you look at the right wing, there hasn't been as much political violence. There's been more state violence
led by the right wing.
Yeah, there's been more state violence, I would say,
but not individual.
There hasn't been
violence. Well, there's the Whitmer thing. Even though they were kind of entrapped by the FBI when they went to go steal him, there was the in Minnesota those the politician that got shot just last year, and the fact that I'm not even remembering their name off the top of my head right now kind of tells you something. That we're not only did we move on from that topic, but we just didn't even give that enough weight. And that was literally a political assassination by a right winger. And there's many other examples of that too. But yeah, I often struggle with this too, because there are some like data points that suggest that this might be a left wing a unique left-wing issue. And then there's other contextual things that I'm like, well, is it just like a causal relationship? Is a product of the environment? And what you bring up is, pretty interesting that, you're right. There is a lot more state violence by right-wingers than there is left-wingers. So like when right-wing violence is state-sponsored and left-wing violence is like, civilian-sponsored. I don't know. We're both violent in that respect. That's kind of an interesting dichotomy. I don't know. It's interesting. I don't know the answer.
It could be, and when I say there's more wing violence sponsored by the state, I mean I literally mean like the war in Iran.
Yeah,
I literally mean
we're
like
in agreement.
The ICE crackdowns.
Yeah, we're in agreement
in Minnesota. Even if you agree with even with you agree with the deportations, and I'm honestly like I'm not like left wing when it comes to border policy at all. I extremely critical of how it was handled in Minnesota, where it seemed to be almost an intentional provocation of a liberal city. And like even and honestly, let's just be honest, like a deportation, even if they're necessary, an act of violence. Like you're physically removing,
you're using force
somebody from the country. You're using force to remove somebody. So like by definition, like there's more right wing state violence. But I mean, we have to remember too, just to conceptualize this a little bit further. There's 300 million people who live in this country. Percentage of people who are carrying out terror attacks or assassination attempts is like a very, very small minority. This is not 1920s Germany or like Russia in the 1890s, where like political assassinations and things of that nature were like a very common thing that happened. Like it was just, there were very violent times where it was like the norm. It's a small percentage of people who are carrying this out. And if you look throughout US history, like there's lots of times of violence. So it's really hard to say, hey, this is like this major left-wing problem, because it's only happened a handful of times. Like we're dealing with a really small sample data.
Yeah.
If this were to happen at like more times this year, then you could say, okay, like there seems to be some issue there. Maybe we should actually see what's actually being said on Blue Sky. I've never been on Blue Sky,
neither have I.
Nor do I know anything really about it. But it's just like the mirror of Truth Social, right? Like they're just like the mirror. Like inverse.
It's the inverse side of that coin.
And I imagine on Blue Sky, it's not even like people like talking about like political analysis. It's just kind of raging against Trump. Like, oh, Trump's literal Hitler. Like it's
like I literally couldn't tell you what's on there. I literally couldn't tell you what's on there because I refuse to go on it. I just don't care enough. I'm kind of
interested. I'm interested to see what's on it now.
Well, poke around, see what you see. But look, what you said is a really good segue, and I'm just going to skip over a couple. I was going to talk about his manifesto and stuff like that, but it's honestly not important anymore. And this is a really good segue into kind of thinking about, that sample size issue that you're talking about. This feels to us like, is violence increasing, political violence, blah, blah, blah. For us, maybe it feels that way, relatively speaking, but there's a time in very recent U.S. history that would make this just feel like a blip. I mean, you say, it would have to happen like 20 more times, for it to this year for it to make an impact. How about?
I'm not saying it would have to happen 20 more times. I'm just saying if it were to happen 20 more times, then you would say, okay, like there's something really brewing.
So I see your 20 more times, and I raise you. What if there was 2,500 bombings in 18 months? What would that make? What eyebrows would that make you raise? Because this is literally go ahead.
Oh no, go.
I mean, this is literally the time in history that I wanted to talk about to like make a comparison point here, because between 1965 and 1972, there was just this period of just epic like political instability in the United States that literally resulted in thousands of bombings in an 18-month span. And it's nuts. So to talk about this, I kind of want to set the stage, right? before I name like who is doing the bombings and like, you know, we kind of need to build the, you know, the space that they existed in, right? I want to talk more about the conditions and not the ideologies. We will talk about the ideologies, trust me. But it's important to know what's going on to understand why it's happening. So the elephant in the room, that Vietnam and the draft, right? The draft is literally the central fact of life for young Americans, young American men specifically in this period. If your lottery number came up, you go. You know, if you go, there's a real high chance you come back in a body bag or don't come back at all. By the end of that war, there's 58,000 Americans dead, over 300,000 wounded, and 2.7 million people served in that. So over 60% of those that were killed were under the age of 21. These are actual boys, children from your neighborhood. And the war is visibly, provably being lied about. So there's the Pentagon Papers that was leaked in 1971. You know, they revealed that the government had been systematically deceiving the public and Congress about the war's progress for years. You know, people are dying for a war that the government knows is unwinnable and won't say so. And unlike in today's war, this one touches everyone, right? You can't opt out. You know, your son, your brother, your boyfriend, they get a number and, you know, they go off to war. And, you know, the personal stakes in that situation are universal in a way that wasn't, you know, with the Iraq war or with the Afghanistan wars or even with this Iran war right now. You know, these wars that we're used to are fought by a volunteer military. Vietnam was not. That was by draft, you know, that was compulsory. Also, there's a lot of shit that happened outside of just war. Between 1963 and 1968, America loses 4 of its most prominent, like, public figures to political violence in 5 years. So JFK in 1963, Malcolm X in 1965, MLK in April 16, 1968, and the original RFK in June of 1968, right? So like each of these arguably equivalent to or greater than, probably greater than, status of Charlie Kirk in their day, right? And there's a ton of them, and they happen in quick succession, one after another. And you think about what that does to a generation that believes that, you know, like moral leadership could actually move a country, right? We're talking about like MLK times, right? And every time, you know, people start crystallizing that belief around a particular person, like MLK, that person gets shot, right? Can you imagine, like, every time you put your hope and your prayers behind one person, they just get cut down? And so by 1968, there's this significant portion of the American left that basically concluded, and with reasonable evidence, that the system just eliminates anyone who generally threatens the power structure and that nonviolence gets you killed. This is what they're thinking at the time. Then there's Kent State, 1970. So Nixon, he announces an invasion of Cambodia on April 30th, 1970, which basically is expanding a war he was elected to end. So Nixon ran on ending the Vietnam War and then expanded it to Cambodia. Kind of similar, right? You know, Trump's the president to end the war, and now he's going into them, right? This expansion of the war to Cambodia, it pisses a lot of people off, specifically young, disaffected men who, you know, would now be drafted into that war. And so at Kent State University in Ohio, there's a bit of a protest that happens. And at that protest, Nixon sends 28 National Guardsmen to the protest, and they open fire on a crowd of unarmed protesters. They shot 67 rounds in 13 seconds and killed 4 students. 9 people were wounded, and 1 person was permanently paralyzed. We're talking about state-sponsored violence on the right? This is it. This is the example, right? And then the government's own commission later calls the shootings unnecessary, unwarranted, and inexcusable. The Ohio governor, however, he calls the students the, quote, worst type of people we harbor in America, just days before. So the student strikes, you know, it erupts on 450 campuses nationwide after this, right? And for many people who had been trying to work within the system, Kent State is the moment that they just stop believing that the system is reformable from within. The government literally just killed unarmed kids that were protesting against a war that they had literally no choice but to go to if they were so drafted. There's more. There's parts that no one talks about. There's this FBI counterintelligence program that ran from 1956 to 1971. It was officially secret and officially illegal. And the stated purpose was to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize, and this is a direct quote, domestic political organizations. And the targets that they were going after were the Black Panther Party, the SDS, a bunch of different civil rights groups, and notably Martin Luther King Jr., who J. Edgar Hoover called the most dangerous Negro in America. And the FBI ended up sending, Martin Luther King an anonymous letter that urged him to kill himself, right? This is all public information now. And the tactics that they used were planting informants, provocateurs, forging documents, basically creating infights within groups, illegal wiretapping, breaking and entering, manufacturing criminal charges. And in one case, Fred Hampton, a direct assassination. So Fred Hampton was the chairman of the Illinois Black Panther Party, the 21-year-old kid. And the Chicago police basically acted on some FBI intelligence. They go and raid his apartment at 4 a.m. in December of 1969. And Hampton was shot twice in the head while sleeping. And that's kind of a strange thing, right? The police swat in and, bust into his house, go into his bedroom and shoot him while he's sleeping. How did he not wake up? Well, an FBI informant by the name of William O'Neill had drugged Hampton's drink the night before to make sure that he wouldn't wake up when the police came into his house. So this counterintelligence program, it only gets exposed in March 1971 when a bunch of activists who were calling themselves the Citizens Commission to Investigate the FBI, and they end up going and breaking into the FBI field office in Pennsylvania, and they steal hundreds of these documents, and then they leak them to the newspapers. And this confirms that this COINTELPRO program is real, and that the government has just been waging this covert war against its own citizens using incredibly illegal means, right? So all of this is happening at the same time, by the state, the wars, the assassinations, all this bullshit. And by 1970, a significant segment of the American youth is watching this happening, watching their friends come home from Vietnam in pieces or not at all. Four of the most prominent, leaders are assassinated. The government is systemically lying about an unwinnable war. The FBI is waging a covert war against civil rights organizations, and the National Guard is shooting unarmed students on college campuses that are protesting against it. And the question isn't why did political violence happen? The question is anyone surprised that it did? Fucked up story, right?
There were crazy times. I guess when it comes to these bombings, though, who was actually doing these?
Yeah. I mean, it's 2,500 bombings in 18 months. It's not a single group of people, So there's a couple of big ones. There's a lot of smaller ones too. Admittedly, we're not going to go over them all, of course. But I'll start with some of the big ones. There's SDS, or the Students for Democratic Society. They were founded in 1960. By 1968, they had 100,000 members and were active in 400 campuses and had nearly an $850,000 budget in then money, right? So it's a lot. Think of this as the left-wing late 60s, huge student organization. Their founding documents is the Port Huron Statement in 1962, written by a guy, mostly by a guy named Tom Hayden. And it says, "We are the people of this generation, bred in at least modest comfort, housed now in universities, looking uncomfortably to the world we inherit, clear-eyed, earnest, generally idealistic, not violent." This was their charter. But throughout the mid-1960s, this group grows, and they grow mostly by opposing Vietnam and also for fighting for civil rights. And, when the war doesn't stop and the assassinations keep happening and the government keeps lying to them, basically a break-off faction within the SDS starts to, think to themselves well, this nonviolence thing isn't working. So what do we do? In 1969, they have a convention in Chicago, and a faction within them called the Weathermen who was named after Bob Dylan lyric, "You don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows." They end up seizing control of the organization. And their position paper calls for a white fighting force that is allied with the Black Liberation Movement to achieve the destruction of U.S. imperialism. So they do a coup of this. Like, imagine if a TPUSA, some like, I don't know, some of the most crazy right-wing variants of people in Turning Point USA take over, then decide to make up a fighting force to achieve the destruction of, I don't know, liberals or some shit like that, like that. This is how they turned. And so their leader, the leader was Bernadine Dorn, who's a law school graduate. J. Edgar Hoover later calls her La Pasionaria of the lunatic left, which is kind of a funny name. Bill Ayers, who was a son of a wealthy utility executive, later becomes like an education professor. Mark Rudd, who led a 1968 Columbia University strike. So these aren't like marginal people. They're smart, they're educated, obviously very passionate people who basically just concluded that, the system can't be reformed and they need to start doing violent shit about it. So one of the first things that they do was on October 8th through 11th in 1969 in Chicago. And it was timed to coincide with this like very contentious trial of the Chicago Seven. And days before that, they blow up a police memorial statue in Haymarket Square. And then they riot through the streets. And they predicted that there was going to be thousands of people. Only about 300 people showed up. They smashed some car windows. They attacked some police, trash businesses. Most of those leaderships, they get arrested. They end up out on bail. And they alienate most of like the broader left. They're like, fuck those people. We're not part of that shit. But in December of 1969, the War Council in Flint, Michigan, they had 300 attendees. And basically this became like a clandestine paramilitary organization within the SDS. And, they were celebrating the Charles Manson murders and, a bunch of weird shit, and they become what was known as the Weather Underground. Then in 1970, they blow up a 4-story townhouse in Greenwich Village in Manhattan. 5 members are in the basement, basically building bombs. And they target what do they target? They target a dance for non-commissioned officers and their dates at Fort Dix in New Jersey. That was a nail bomb, by the way. They created a fucking nail bomb. Those things are nasty. It's designed to kill people. It's really fucked up. And then at noon, one of their bombs went off accidentally and 3 of their own members were killed, which was wild. And this becomes like a bit of a turning point, right? Their group starts losing membership, shedding membership hard, because nobody wants to be associated with these fucking crazy people, right? And then after that, they kind of refocus. They're like, okay, we're never going to target people anymore. We're only going to target property and only symbolic targets, and always with warnings. So after this point, apparently what they actually start doing is bombing like important buildings. So in 1971, in March, they bombed the Senate side of the U.S. Capitol building. They made a warning call beforehand. There was no casualties, hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages. And then they left like a note saying, they're protesting the bombing of Laos. In May 1972, they bombed a women's bathroom in the Air Force Wing of the Pentagon on Ho Chi Minh's birthday. That flooding destroys like classified computer tapes and, uncountable amount of damage in that respect. And they say that it was basically retaliation for the bombing of Hanoi. In January 1975, they bombed the U.S. State Department headquarters, 20 offices, 3 floors, no casualties, and on and on and on. They do a shit ton of these things, right? So they call in a bomb, they blow up some building. It's usually at like 1 a.m. Nobody dies, but they're just doing this over and over and over again. Pretty crazy, this one specific group.
They're like a gayer version of the Red Army faction.
Kind of. It's in the same time period and same idea. You're right.
They're just not like they're just like not nearly as cool or effective.
Well, so they started off as like kind of like as bad or worse than the Red Army faction. I mean, you don't set up a nail bomb. That's a nasty weapon, That's intended to create the maximum amount of carnage against people. But then after that, they like pussied out and they were like, you know what, we're not going to do that anymore, which I'm glad that they did, because nobody else, died in their bombings thereafter, but still, you're kind of right. I'm going to fly through in the next couple of these. There's another one, a different group, the Black Liberation Army. So you can't. This is like inextricably tied to the Black Panther Party. It was founded in 1966 in Oakland, and their first tactic is basically armed police patrols to monitor and document police brutality. And they go out and they carry their guns like legally in California. And Edgar Hoover, he designates the BPP, the Black Panther Party, the quote greatest threat to internal security of the United States. And that counterintelligence program targets them specifically and extremely ruthlessly. Infiltrations, manufactured feuds, framed prosecutions. In the case of Fred Hampton, as I said before, direct assassination. 1970, that Black Panther leadership is decimated or in prison. And basically, the organization starts fracturing. So this guy, Huey Newton, he begins, basically kicking out more of those militant factions. And the Black Liberation Army emerges from what was left over. It's not really a formal organization, more like a loose network of cells that were former Black Panthers mostly. They were operating across multiple cities, connected by loose ideologies, but not like a command and control structure. And their goals were basically take up arms for the liberation and the self-determination of Black people in the United States. And what did they do? They primarily targeted police officers. This is by their doctrine. They documented between 1970 and 1976 something like 70 incidences of violence against the Fraternal Order of Police. In 1970, they plant a bomb in St. Brendan's Church in San Francisco. Bomb detonates, no serious injuries, but, they bombed. It was during a funeral of a police officer. So, it was 1971, 5 men ambush and shoot NYPD officers on the streets in Harlem. Both of the officers die. And in 1972, NYPD officers, 2 of them get shot and killed at the corner of Avenue B in Manhattan. Again, this is in retaliation for a number of things, but I'm not going to really get into them. But unlike the Weather Underground, the Black Liberation Army, they're not actually trying to avoid casualties. They're actually trying to cause them, and specifically among law enforcement. And their philosophy is much more explicit, which is armed resistance against the police state. But this is literally happening during the same time period. Completely different group. Different set of goals, crazy violent, right? And this is happening every single year on top of the last group that we just talked about. And then there's the FALN, the Puerto Rican group. Do you remember these guys, Henry?
Yeah, these are the ones that try to kill Truman, right?
Yeah, right. We covered them in the context of Puerto Rican history, and I'm kicking myself about this because we covered them in the relationship, the colonial relationship with the U.S., but we didn't connect them to this broader domestic bombing campaign that was literally happening at the same time. So if you want to learn more about
part of a global, it was kind of a part. It was definitely part of a global movement, really.
For sure, because the Red Army faction was happening around the same time as well. So if you want to learn,
and Red Army faction is I don't know. I think they stand out a little bit. I feel like there's something unique about the Red Army faction that doesn't really index with broader left-wing movements for some reason. I think it's because there's I don't know, maybe we can get into this later, but I feel like there's a lot of East Germany is a really, really hard play. It's very hard to pin them down, where they really belong in the political zeitgeist.
We have a whole episode on that one as well. Somewhere else. So if you want to learn about Red Army faction, you can listen to that episode. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the FALN in this context because it was happening in the United States at the same time. But again, for the broader context there, you're going to want to listen to our episodes on Puerto Rican history. But, I think the reason that most people don't know any of these stories that we're telling, is that these stories, they end up getting siloed, right? So Puerto Rican history over here, Black liberation over there, anti-war movement, and the other place. The through line is that all these groups, are, in the same moment, they're concluding that, property destruction and violence were justified responses to their grievances. And that, I think that through line gets lost a lot. So I'm just going to quickly cover the FALN. For those that don't know about them, Puerto Rico has obviously been a territory since 1898. Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens. They can't vote in federal elections. They have no voting representation in Congress. Blah, blah, blah. They shit on us in Puerto Rico, right? It's true. So during the 1970s, there's like this violent independence, movement that sprung up initially in the 50s, but that kind of resurfaces in the 70s. In the 50s, these Puerto Rican nationalists tried to assassinate President Truman. That was in 1954. And then they also set a fire in the floor of the U.S. House of Representatives. Again, this is in the 50s, but this is kind of like a background context from where the FALN come from, right? The FALN springs up in 1974. They put 5 large bombs to go off simultaneously in Manhattan. So on Wall Street, in Rockefeller Center Avenue, and somewhere else that I'm forgetting. Doesn't matter. Somewhere else. And there's like massive property damage, no injuries, and they leave, basically their list of demands that Puerto Rico needs to be independent. And they do it again in 75. There's the Francis Tower bombing. Again, there's a landmark Lower Manhattan restaurant. This is the same building, interestingly, where George Washington actually gives his farewell address to the Continental Army in 1783. So, historic place. FALN detonates a bomb during the lunch rush hour. 4 people are killed, 50 are injured. One of the deadliest, domestic terror attacks in American history to that specific point. And then between 74 and 83, they do more than 130 bombings across the United States, specifically in New York, Chicago, and Washington. And they hit banks, government buildings, corporate offices, probably one of the most prolific domestic bombing campaigns in American history. And it's a group of Puerto Ricans, which kind of makes me a little ashamed. But, it is what it is. They had their set of grievances, and they thought that the only way to get any kind of, justice was to use violence. And then there's this wild, clemency story. So interestingly, in 1999, President Bill Clinton offers clemency to 16 convicted FALN members. So none of these people were convicted of bombings or crimes that directly injured anyone as a point, but they all were serving 19 plus years in prison. And then they had this huge backlash, like the FBI opposes it. Congress voted 311 to 41 against it. Even Hillary Clinton, his own fucking wife, who was running for Senate in New York, opposed the action. And, Clinton was like, whatever, I'm still going to pardon them. And this is one of the most controversial uses of, presidential, pardon in modern history, I think.
I wonder what the political, I wonder why he did that. Like what political pressures were bending him to do that.
I honestly don't know. I think that might be worth its own episode because I think it's fucking wild,
It's it's pretty strange. I mean, if there's obviously, I don't know, maybe not obviously. Maybe Bill Clinton just was like, oh, these Puerto Ricans aren't so bad. Maybe, but the fact that Hillary Clinton, she opposed it, maybe that was like a hedge or something. I don't know. He was on his second term.
She's kind of a
hedging with that.
So who knows?
So maybe because I'm trying to think of what
is it? I mean,
second election.
Putting her aside, 311 people voted against this, which means the overwhelming majority of Democrats voted against it too. So I'd like to look into that a bit further. I don't know the answer. Found it like an interesting little piece of history. All right, I think this will probably be the last of these groups that I'll talk about, and then we can kind of tie it all together and just have more unstructured chat. There's this interesting one called the Symbionese Liberation Army, or the SLA, and they grow out of the Black Cultural Association, which was a prison education program at Vacaville Medical Facility in California. There were these white Berkeley students who go into the prison to tutor inmates in political science and Black history. And there they met a guy by the name of Donald DeFreeze. Now, DeFreeze was a Black career criminal who has escaped from Soledad prison. He becomes the SLA's de facto leader. He calls himself General Field Marshal Sink. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right or not, but he named himself after basically the 1839 leader of the Amistad slave ship rebellion, right? This guy's a hardened criminal that was playing at being a revolutionary, and he was surrounding himself by, these believers who had arguably no idea what they were doing. So the SLA officially forms in Berkeley in 1973. It had 8 core members. 7 of them are white, middle-class, college-educated kids. And one of them is this guy, this like hardened criminal who named himself after the leader of the Amistad slave revolt. Basically, they all these white kids end up adopting Swahili names, which is like funny cultural appropriation. I don't know what all their names were, but they all like drank this Kool-Aid, and they all just adopted all these Swahili names. And their motto was,
Can we learn what these Swahili names were?
Okay, let's Google them. Let's see if my Google wants to work.
Were they like taking names like?
Dude, I don't know. We're about to find out.
That is
okay.
fun.
Okay, I got him. Oh no, I want the Swahili names. Okay, so let's see. So Donald DeFries becomes Sink Mtume, which Mtume is Swahili for prophet, and that was the main guy, the criminal. And then there's Nancy Ling Perry, who becomes Fahiza, Patricia Soltisic, who becomes Zoya, also known by her nickname Mizmoon. Atwood becomes Gelina. Wolf becomes Cujo, sometimes spelled Kajo. Camilla Hall just becomes Gabby, which isn't interesting. And then Russell Little becomes Osceola. Then Joseph Ramiro becomes Bo. They're not really all that funny. I'm glad we looked into it.
Oh, no, it's just funny.
The funny part is that they all adopted all of these random Swahili names. And here's their motto, by the way. Their motto is "Death to the fascist insect that preys upon the life of the people." These guys make Antifa slogans look like, like a strongly worded letter from Chuck Schumer,
Well, we don't really have... I mean, I guess finish telling... I'll give my commentary after...
Yeah, for sure.
You kind of wrap up them.
It was honestly, this one's a small one, but they're super weird. They never exceeded like 22 members at their peak, but small but mighty. They assassinated Marcus Foster, who was the superintendent of the Oakland school system. Foster was the first Black superintendent in Oakland's history, and he was beloved. And he was actively working to improve education for the exact communities that the SLA claimed that they were fighting for. Why? Because the SLA believed that he supported mandatory student ID cards. The crazy part about it is that he already withdrew the support for that policy by the time that they end up killing him. They ended up also killing a Black educator over a policy that he, longer held. That's how that boiled down. Now, this wasn't, some of these other parties like the Black Panther Party or the Weathermen, they end up condemning it. All the other radical groups in America basically turn against them before they even got off the ground. So yeah, I mean, there's so much more that I can talk about. I mean, we'd never get through it all. There was literally hundreds of these random groups. And importantly, and this is the last thing I'll say before we kind of get off the topic, figure, right? 2,500 bombings in like an 18-month period. That's the total domestic bombing count from the FBI statistics between 1971 and 1972. And then those 4 groups that we talked about account for dozens of major attacks. The rest of them come from hundreds of these smaller cells, were either individuals or affiliated groups that were across the country that honestly will never make a history book at all. This is like tip of the iceberg kind of shit. What's interesting about this is that it's not strictly left-wing shit. Majority of it is, 68%, according to the University of Maryland's START terrorism database, basically confirms that 68% of those attacks came, and 58% of the deaths came from left-wing groups. So this is dominant, but not exclusive. The other 32% is wildly unreported. It's actually pretty interesting. In the 1970s, there's this just like ideological zoo of people that were doing comparable shit. Like, for example, the KKK and the white supremacists, other white supremacist group, account for about 14% of the attacks. There's also this anti-Castro Cuban group called Omega 7 that were extremely active, and they're small, but they bombed dozens of buildings, and they mostly targeted Cuban diplomatic interests. Also, you'll find this interesting, Jewish Defense League. They were also part of their bombing runs. They're very right wing and religiously motivated. There's also the Nation of Islam, the fringe elements of them were doing a bunch of bombings, also pretty conservative right wing, just different flavor of right wing.
They categorize the Nation of Islam as right wing.
The elements of the Nation of Islam were the right wing fringe that were doing the right wing fringe of the Nation of Islam were doing bombings during this period.
Is that the fringe that believe that that white people are like a designed cancer or a designed plague?
I don't know. I have no idea.
I think it's a Nation of Islam. There's parts of the Nation of Islam that, because they're not like traditional.
It's
Muslims,
not a monolith. Yeah.
It's like, they're a lot of these groups have different factions, like black Hebrew Israelites. I mean, some of them are extremely normal people, and then there's some that are more radical. I suppose that's the same with the Nation of Islam, or I don't know if you would include that in like the broader community of black Muslims. Like, does like a normal black Sunni Muslim consider the Nation of Islam folks like people like within the Muslim community?
You're asking the wrong person.
That's the question.
I don't know.
That's a question to a black Muslim, but I know that there's like some fringes of the Nation of Islam that believe that basically like white people are like this race that have been designed to essentially like destroy, like they're kind of like a malignant type cancer, and all other races that are not black and not white are failed experiments trying to create the white race. So like Asians, like Indians,
me,
they're a failed experiment trying to create that. And it was they were created on an island by a black scientist who I'm probably not getting the details correct.
That's a weird fucking story, dude.
But it's like a strange belief. But on the fringes of because I guess this would categorize as kind of a racial group, and the other ones that you listed as well, like I guess what's included in right wing,
KKK, white supremacists
are racial or ethnic, like militant racial or ethnic groups, like the anti-Castro groups, or the KKK, or the or what was the Jewish Defense League, the Jewish Defense League,
or the white supremacist militias, shit like that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So let's go back to the broader conversation of like, okay, we're trying to categorize: is this more of a left-wing phenomenon? Do we have too small of a sample size to really make that judgment? Because we can think about like let's actually, we've only been talking about the left-wing militant groups, but there have been I guess what you would quote right-wing acts of political violence as well. And you included like, some of the kind of retaliation bombings or bombings in the 60s by the KKK and those types of groups. But then I guess the most recent examples, if you want to put this in the bucket, so I guess you could say the Oklahoma City bombing.
Yep. That would be a right-wing one. Mm-hmm. Or at least right-wing motivated.
You could say if you want to put January 6th on that, I mean, that wasn't a terrorist attack, but that was...
It's kind of a lame excuse for a riot, but...
A political... No, I don't think it was a lame excuse. I think it was a riot. Like, it was a giant riot. But I don't...
Maybe a lame excuse for a coup.
Arguably... Yeah, more of a lame excuse for a coup. Arguably a coup... I don't know. But it was a disruptive riot.
It destroyed property,
at the least,
right?
At the
they
very
destroyed
least,
property. Some people got hurt.
Violent.
Right? People got hurt. People died. So
then we have. I mean, do you include there was the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting, but that carried out by a group that was carried out by a lone gunman. But then
a lot of those
other 2,500 we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Were like lone gunmen as well.
There was a Charleston shooting, back in 2015, that horrific one.
Yep.
Then there was the shooting in Buffalo that wasn't very long ago, where that was what, 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. But I guess those are characterized, but they're lone gunmen. They're kind of like freaks. And they're, instead of going after political figures, they're kind of the theme is that they're actually taking their violence on, the racial group that they hate,
Right.
whether that be blacks or Jews or whatever. So there are traces of that. So I guess they just have, there's different flavors of it. There's different.
Well, there was also the Minnesota House of Representatives Speaker Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark Hortman, who were shot and killed in their home in 2025. This was also politically motivated by a right winger. There's a lot of examples, right? But also, if we look at the very recent history of political violence and we compare it to the just breathtakingly massive amount of violence that happened in the 70s, it's not even close.
Yeah, in that context. So I'm trying to think of more ones that happened recently. There was a shooting at the Republican baseball game.
Yep.
So
that was more left wing, but still, that's an example.
That guy fits in the same category as our try to be assassin today, a resistance liberal type. But he was older. He was a boomer. We don't know what the hell the Las Vegas shooting was about to this day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's still a mystery.
Whether that was politically motivated or not, or we just don't know. Am I missing any other major one? I know I must be.
I mean, the only ones that come to mind are like school shootings and stuff like that, but I'm not necessarily sure.
Didn't someone try to kill Kavanaugh?
Brett Kavanaugh?
Yeah.
I think so. That was 2022, 3 years ago. Attempted murder-suicide as a woman, frustrated with the fact that they were going to overturn Roe v. Wade, as well as, their non-action on the recent shooting in Uvalde, Texas.
In New Zealand, there was that mosque shooting.
Yeah, Christchurch, or no, that's different.
It was a mosque. No, there was a mosque shooting in New Zealand, and this was like 5 or 6 years ago by a white supremacist, by like a white nationalist type. Then there was a recent one. Well, there was a synagogue shooting in Australia recently. That was, I think, a Muslim, right? That was an Arab Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. You can't really. That's more of a reaction to what's going on in Gaza. I mean, there was a recent terrorist attack in the U.S. or there was an attempted synagogue shooting recently, right? I guess a lot of these are being brushed. A lot of these kind of anti-Israel ones are kind of being. They're so common now that people don't really react to them anymore.
Yeah, but also like like I was saying in the 70s, we're talking about 2,500 incidences of bombings, right? And the overwhelming majority of them are these. Right. What I'm saying is, the overwhelming majority of those are like the onesie twosies that we're trying to piece together today. About the today examples. There's just so many more of them. What that maths out to be, like on average, that maths out to be 5 bombings per day for 18 months straight.
Yeah. So there are no organized groups really that are behind, or maybe there is, but
George Soros.
Take the left wing ones.
Mm-hmm.
So take this guy right here.
The guy who tried to kill Trump. Mm-hmm. Both of them.
Take the guy who tried to kill Trump. I mean, the guy who tried to kill Trump, man, that's a weird story too.
Yep.
Again, you can't help but kind of give some grace to the conspiracy theorists, because the guy, there's like no history on this guy at all. But then when you think about it a little bit more, you're like, well, there's some people that are just like completely unnoticed and forgotten. Like, just no one notices them. No one really knows anything about them. They don't have a social life. Those people, I guess, could fall under the radar.
I don't even think it's that. I think what it is like, if we take a look at like today, obviously being kind of a microcosm of, our example in the 60s and 70s, just because of the total volume wasn't even close. A lot of the through lines are still the same though, right? In the 60s and 70s, there was like a systemic, pervasive and universal issue, or set of issues that impacted all Americans, and as a result, you see a number of groups, in this case, primarily or predominantly left-wing groups, but also a lot of right-wing ones, and a bunch of onesie twosies, you know, and the conditions were so bad that they decided to act with violence to make a change. And then you look at today, and it's kind of similar, right? While we're not drafting people to go to war, we are still in forever wars that everyone's fucking sick of, right? We also have, just terrible economic situation in the United States that doesn't seem to be getting better. If anything, it looks like it's getting worse, right? And then we've got like Epstein files and the ensuing cover-ups around that. And, it's the potential that, people at the top in our own government are literally, trafficking children and raping them and maybe eating babies. I don't know. Like, that's the crazy shit that we live in. And in the case of Luigi Mangione, the thing that was disaffecting him so much was, fucking healthcare is a fucking racket, and it's, literally you just cannot survive. And then there's this group of people that are making billions and trillions of dollars on off the backs of our suffering, right? And so the through line in the 70s was everybody's having a bad time, and they're placing their hopes and their dreams on nonviolent means to change the system, and then all those people get shot and killed. And then there's parallels today, right? Like, I mean, I don't necessarily agree with all of the things that Charlie Kirk said, but one thing I will say is that man was nonviolent, right? He was kind to the people mostly that he went out and engaged with in those college campuses. I respect him for that. And then they shot him too, maybe because he was starting to go against the Israelis. Maybe, I don't know. That's the conspiracy theory.
No.
Probably, maybe. I don't know. Who knows, right?
No, I need to shut that one down. As like as a person who's been, I feel like I have enough credit on the subject of criticizing Israel for over a decade publicly.
Yeah.
Of saying, like, come on, man. As horrible as we feel about Charlie Kirk getting murdered, it was hard. Like, I was deeply impacted by it. Let's not pretend like this guy was like plotting against the Israelis or like taking a side against them, or would have been
a foil to them in any way.
Against Trump, who would have been against Trump now for going to war with Iran.
He would have bent over backwards to support that.
Well, I know exactly what he would do, and I honestly know exactly what he would do, and I can say with confidence, if he was alive, he was a highly skilled political operator. His death was a huge hit for like American conservatism as a political movement. Like, he was actually someone who was almost irreplaceable for that specific movement, because he had the ability to absorb all of these different factions of the American right wing and create this really large tent. So he could he never could really fully appeal to anyone, but he could appeal a little bit to everyone. So he could let kind of like boomer tards into the tent. He could bring in, people who were more like Tea Party types. He could bring in more mainstream Republicans. He could bring in more like kind of openly racist Republicans. He could bring in be like more elements of the fringe, because he was able to speak to kind of all of them in some way and like make everyone seem somewhat seen. And he was able to simultaneously kind of talk and communicate with the very hardcore Zionist element of the right wing, which is honestly the majority of it, but also the rising, more anti-Zionist, I would even say anti-Semitic part of the right wing. And he was able to communicate with those people as well and like almost include them in the tent successfully. So if he was alive, what he would be doing, and this is kind of what he did when Trump bombed the nuclear plants, is that he would say something along the lines as, I share your concern about this war, and we didn't vote for forever wars. And we're deeply skeptical. He would say something like, we're deeply skeptical about joining another forever war. And he would put the language around the forever war. He would keep on saying we're against regime forever wars, we're against regime changes, but then at the end he would caveat by saying something like, we don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon, but we don't believe in regime change and we're against it. Then he would also say, we trust the president to make the right decisions. So he would not.
Yeah, you're probably right.
He would openly criticize something that probably the U.S. policymakers are never intending to do, which is the occupy Iran. So he would set the bar as in like, we're against the occupation of Iran. That's where they would
Or
set
boots
the bar.
on the ground or something crazy like that.
Or
right?
boots on the ground, something that's
Mhm.
unlikely to happen. Like, we're against boots on the ground, and be really, really hypercritical of that. So you set the goalposts right. Like, you're criticizing something that hasn't really even been done yet, and that's the worst case scenario. But you kind of know the worst case scenario probably won't happen. So as long as that happens, you're in the clear. And then you can even give Trump credit for when that doesn't happen. It's like, I was confident in Trump not taking us into a forever war, and him
That's what
making the right
happened.
decision. So that's what
Mhm.
he would. That's exactly how they would phrase it. Like, that's how that would be the messaging. And he wouldn't be someone who'd be like, yeah, let's go bomb the fuck out of them. Like he would be, I'm very skeptical about this, but I trust my president. I trust Donald Trump because he knows that we voted for, and he would, at the same time, he would be working with them on messaging. So, I mean, that's what a skilled political operator can do. And he was highly skilled at it. And I wonder if the person who killed him understood this dynamic. Like, I wonder if this person understood that this was a very important figure on the American right. He probably understood that he was a very influential person, but I wonder if this person understood like what made him such a skilled political operator. I honestly doubt it. I think he just was like, this is a big right wing conservative authority who's
No, I
causing
don't think it was that.
fascism. We're gonna kill him.
I don't
But
think that
like,
was
when you think about
he was
like
that.
Charlie
Tyler
Kirk,
Rob. I don't think Tyler Robinson was that sophisticated.
yeah,
If indeed Tyler Robinson was the one that killed him, he's still
but
allegedly
it's
the shooter.
I wonder, like, I think about that because
Mm.
it was a big, he was an extremely important figure, and that guy
Sure.
probably changed the world.
Yeah.
Tyler Robinson probably changed the future outlook of the United States by killing him.
Yeah. How
It's
do you
again horrible, but
feel about like maybe this could be like the last point because we talked a little bit about this earlier, but I kind of want to get after we've spoken all about it and specifically after we've talked about the conditions that were present during the 1970s that kind of you know, created the breeding ground for us to have 2,500 bombings in 18 months. Like, how do you feel about the violence, that kind of seems to be the catalyst for a lot of these things, whether it's, MLK or, other JFK or any of these other people, or whether it's, straight up promoting a endless war and lying about it and drafting, millions of people to go to that war and thousands of them died as in the past and in today. How do you feel about things like, how the Homeland Security is using ICE to kill Americans in the street? Maybe not as a direct command, but definitely as a byproduct of their, instituted violence against, immigrants in this country. How do you feel about like all of this? The UHC guy, Brian Thompson,
well, I don't know.
die,
Would you?
but definitely created the conditions by which he increased the suffering of Americans. He ran the largest, most profitable healthcare system in the United States, and to the detriment of
Well,
the people that were
listen.
supposed to be receiving care from him. Like how do we
Wait,
feel about that? Should we ignore that, or or should we
wait.
engage with that?
Let's pull this back a little bit. I think there's different. You can look at these. Honestly, I look at the CEO of United Health as someone who inherited an imperfect system. Like, to the U.S. healthcare system is messed up. The guy inherited an imperfect system. Yeah, he worked on it. Did he deserve like judgment from some loser like Luigi Mangione? Like,
Not what I'm
absolutely
saying.
not.
That's not what I'm saying.
So and also, how do we class? So you're saying in response to like state violence. I mean, do we classify the assassination of JFK and MLK Jr. as state violence? Like, is that in the like what I consider state violence is like when the cops come and kill somebody who's unarmed, or even when the cops just kill someone in general. Like whenever there's a law enforcement that takes place
I mean,
that results
JFK is
in
definitely in question, right? But we still don't
But
know.
those are conspiracies. Like, I
Right?
wouldn't
Okay,
classify
fair.
that as state violence.
What about
Those
using
are
the National Guard to kill, a number of students at Kent State University?
That's state
Unarmed
violence.
students.
Yes,
That's
I would
state
consider that
violence.
state violence. But then you have to make the distinction of justified state violence versus unjustified state violence.
So I'd argue that was
if a
unjustified state violence, right?
I would argue I would consider, and I'm not trying to play like word games, but I think the distinctions are important. Like, there's like if somebody is about to stab somebody and a cop comes and shoots them, then that's justified state violence.
Of course.
If in my opinion, the ICE killings in Minneapolis were both unjustified. The killing of that young lady and the
on those
killing
points,
of that other guy,
unjustified.
and I think those were unjustified. But also, not to digress, the second guy they killed, I'm not saying that he deserved any being killed at all. But it was interesting that he carried a gun, and I don't know, he kind of fit the description of like the liberal who's like, listen, like, we're not going to be pussies about guns anymore. Like, we're going to start carrying and all of that.
He did so legally, lawfully.
No, I'm not saying he did it. I'm not saying at all that it was justified. I'm just saying that it was interesting that he fits that description of like liberals with guns.
I mean, the whole reason why California has such strict gun laws today is because fucking Reagan was scared shitless of a bunch of Black Panthers walking through the streets, openly, displaying their weapons to combat, police violence against Black communities. And so that's why they quickly rammed through a lot of gun control measures in that state, because they didn't want Black people armed and walking around their state. It's just like a interesting, ironic thing, because Reagan is a right-winger. He's supposed to be of the party that's like, yeah, 2A, whatever. So what I find more interesting about the fact that this guy was carrying a gun, is a parallel to, my Reagan example in California. Right-wingers today, or before this ICE shooting in Minnesota, were all about Second Amendment. Nobody was mad on the right wing that, Kyle Rittenhouse took a gun to a protest and defended himself, quote unquote, against the people there. He went to a protest with a gun and he shot and killed people. Meanwhile, this other guy goes to a protest with a gun, never brandishes it, never takes it out, doesn't do anything wrong, outside of the law. Then he gets murdered in cold blood. And we all saw it in 4K. It's like undeniable. Like they unjustifiably murdered him. And it's just ironic because this is a direct outcropping of a right wing policy to use ICE as the enforcers of a ideal, which is to tamp down on immigration and deport people. This is a right wing state sponsored violence. And again, I think we're wrestling with the issue. Like we're not saying that any of this justifies anyone killing anyone else. In any sense, like violence is never okay, no matter what side of the spectrum you are. But what I'm trying to do is like pull this back from a left wing, right wing thing, and just think about when human beings are impacted to such a degree, they reach a breaking point where they break from, what I would consider normal human behavior, nonviolence, because I don't think it's normal to use violence and kill people. I think there's something breaks in an individual when they go out and choose to do that. And I don't think that this is unique for your political party or for your race or for whatever. If you're oppressed long enough, some blowback's going to happen.
Well,
Are we seeing an
I
oppressive
understand
enough
there's
like
gonna,
society right now that that's the reason why we're seeing political violence? I don't know. Maybe you can make that argument.
well, I don't know. These people that have committed, if we're talking about the ones who are on the quote unquote left, they're not oppressed people. Like the Cal Tech engineer who's a teacher, his life, like, is he an
Yeah, I
oppressed
mean
person?
that's why I'm saying that I don't think that this is like a normal human
Was
thing to do, right? Like something was wrong with this guy, mentally, to go through with that.
or or you take up the
But it doesn't happen in a
cause
vacuum. Yeah, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's like the white kids
of
from that group that took up Swahili names because they joined groups with a fucking criminal guy. Like it's very easy to empathize with other human beings, even if it's not like directly impacting you, and for you to go off and like crazy shit, some stupid shit. And it doesn't. What I'm saying is, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's not like just magically, like political violence that we're seeing today doesn't just appear out of nowhere. Like this guy just didn't wake up one day completely independently of his surroundings and just decide like, hey, I'm gonna buy a shotgun, take a train from LA to DC, book a hotel room, and shoot up the White House Correspondents Center. That is not just happening randomly, right? There's like a causal relationship, right?
yeah, I agree. I mean, shit's happening. People are people go crazy, but it's not a new phenomenon, which I think
Nope.
is the important thing. Something I think of whenever there's like an attempted political assassination. It's not like it's I always think of the movie with Christopher Walken where, oh man, what the hell is this movie
Hang on.
called?
Side note: we're coming across our 1 hour mark right now, so I just
The
want to.
Dead Zone. All right, so there's a movie called The Dead Zone. It's Christopher Walken, and basically he sees the future.
Mhm.
So he sees the future that this president is going to like launch a nuclear weapon and destroy the world. So he sets up to assassinate him. So when he's trying to when he tries to assassinate the president, he fails, but the president holds up a baby to shield himself, and it ruins his campaign, obviously.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, I wonder. Sometimes when something happens like that, I'm like, I wonder if that guy is like Christopher Walken from the Dead Zone, and he's like from the future, and he's
I don't know.
coming back to change history.
I don't know, man.
Maybe some of these people think that. All right, let's end this thing because the recording's going to stop. Thanks everyone for listening to another episode of Bro History. Make sure you rate and review the podcast if you're listening on your app, and then subscribe on YouTube. Danny, anything else?
Join in on the comments if you're like watching us. We're on YouTube and Spotify with video. So let us know what you think of the show. Tell us what you think about the topic. I'm sure you guys have opinions about it, so we'll respond to them in kind.
All right, cool. Peace.
Peace.